So I'm from California, and way back when I was on the college search, I realized that I'd likely go out to the East Coast if I wanted to play field hockey. My mum and I organized a road trip through Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island to hit a bunch of different schools in a short amount of time. One of the schools was Ithaca College. It was a last-minute decision to stop there too, so we didn't have much time to explore the general area afterwards. We had been told by multiple people, though, that the waterfalls in the area were beyond gorgeous and well worth the stop, so my mum and I decided to swing by one before we left for Pennsylvania. We put Ithaca Falls in our rental car GPS, and it brought us to this red curb loop and an old sort of run-down overlook of the falls. This overlook was down a hill and through some trees, so my mum didn't want to leave the car on a red curb. She encouraged me to go down and check it out on my own, and so I did just that. The first time I went down, I was sure to be observant of everything around me. Didn't want any randos in the woods sneaking up on me. I went onto the ledge and took some pics, sat and listened to the water for a while, then turned around to go back up. When I turned, I got this really odd feeling as if someone was watching me or standing with me. I got really uncomfortable too and sort of started looking around. Nothing seemed to be wrong though, so I calmly headed back up the hill. I got in the car, showed my mum the photos, and realized that I didn't take a video. My mum suggested I go back down to get the video. We've got time, she said, so again I did. The second time I go down, I feel a little less happy, I suppose. I was down a slope, so my mum couldn't see me, and I felt more alone and exposed than the time before, and that sinking feeling just kept growing. I go to the edge, take the video with shaking hands. Now I'm feeling like I need to get out of here because there's an intense sense of urgency. I turn around to go back up, and some sort of force stops me dead in my tracks. I'm frozen there like a rabbit or a deer frozen in headlights. I literally cannot get myself to move forward or take a step. An absolutely just overwhelming sense of dread sweeps over my body and presses on my chest. Something that I'm yet to experience again, but I literally feel like I'm about to die. I still can't move and sit there terrified as I feel a massive presence come up behind me. And whatever it was, this thing felt huge and very much real, and yet I can't seem to get away. I'm still stuck and helpless. I keep standing there, too scared to turn around, unable to move, when the hairs on the back of my neck instantly stand up. It bends down, looms towards me, and right next to my ear says, "Yoo-hoo." And I kid you not that when I heard that, I ran faster than I have in my entire life. I tore up that hill, still too afraid to see what was behind me. I got in the car, slammed the door, and, like in a movie, went drive to my mum. My mum looks at me in disbelief and goes, "Is everything okay?" And I just say, "Drive." She told me later that I was pale white and that the sense of urgency in my voice just told her that she had to get away from whatever it was that I was scared of. What spooks me so much about this story is that I never actually turned around. It felt so real, though, that it could have been a person, but I was right against the overlook. I don't think it could have snuck up behind me like that. I've also gotten a similar sense of dread visiting other haunted places too, and I really felt like it was something paranormal. As for the yoo-hoo, it didn't sound male or female, to be honest, but what it did sound was mean, as if it was trying to scare me or intimidate me. I've had a few paranormal experiences, but this one certainly takes the cake for the scariest. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your thoughts if you have some as to what it might have been, but as for me, I won't be going back there anytime soon, that's for sure. So do you guys know those silly school trips that last a few days? Well, I used to go on as many of those as I could because I loved them at the time. It was always so much fun to choose your roommates and decide who went on what bed and stuff like that. And I must have been maybe 12 or 13 at the time of this story, everyone else involved being around the same age too. This school trip was meant to be like any other as well. It was for my English class, and it was about a certain author that we were studying at the time. The day started ordinarily too. We got off of the couch and went up to our designated rooms. In the room was a shower and a toilet and 4 bunk beds. One was closer to the door and the second was parallel to it on the opposite side of the room. I was on the bottom bunk and my friend Rosa was on the bunk on top of me. My other friends, Eloise and Noelle, they were on the other bunks, Eloise being on the bottom and Noelle was on the top. Now, to get into our room, you had to go up 2 flights of stairs and sort of into a little foyer area, and from there you had a door directly to the left of the foyer entrance door. You go through that door, and there were 2 more doors, one to the left and one straight forward. The one directly in front was our door. It's important to note too that some friends of ours were in the room to the left. We were also allowed to go out into small groups into the village or the town area as long as we told a teacher. I remember my room and the room next to us too went out to grab some snacks and food, as we would not be having food until the next morning, so we wanted something. As our room was bigger, we all went in there to enjoy our masterful feast. And it must have been around maybe 6 p.m. I would guess, but maybe a little later. Our school was very friendly, everyone knew pretty much everyone, so we would have a set time that we would all go down and talk, socialise, play snooker, watch The Love Island, with subtitles of course, or just generally chill out. Our teachers would join in too, and it was a lot of fun. We would usually go up to our rooms around 10 or 11 p.m, and that night we went up at about 10. My roommates and I stayed up for a while, just sort of talking and sharing sweets around. The rooms next to ours didn't have a toilet, and they were worried about what they would do, so we decided that instead of being smart and just giving them our room key and taking it back in the morning, that we would keep the door unlocked for them. And I'm pretty sure that I fell asleep at around midnight after everyone else had fallen asleep. At some point though, I woke up shortly after, completely naked mind you, and half asleep as well, but I'm a light sleeper, so when I heard the door click shut, I immediately woke up. At first, I sort of assumed that it was one of the girls next door coming in to use the toilet, but it wasn't. I heard a sort of low grunting or panting sound, which confused my little asleep brain to no end, but I concluded that it was one of the male teachers who just forgot to check up on everyone. It's not that uncommon, to be honest, but what I didn't expect was the dude to come over and sit down on the edge of my bed, as if he was getting ready to get in. He sat on my foot, and I guess that he felt it because he stood back up and put his hands on the end bars of the ladders on both of the bunks, I assume trying to stay standing up. For some reason, I still thought that it was a teacher, but I was starting to wake up a little bit at this point, starting to take in the situation. I heard him say, "This isn't my room. It's a room with girls in it." And I just replied, "Yeah, it is." But it was weird, because it wasn't a question, and he didn't sound confused or embarrassed. He stated that he was in a room full of young girls, and he knew that he was there. I'm pretty sure that he purposely looked for a girl's room too, but he also didn't speak like a normal human being. Looking back, why on earth I wasn't freaked out by this point, I have no idea. Note too that this is only the first night, and a lot of crazy things happened on that trip, some of which are going to haunt me forever. And always lock your doors no matter what. Be smart and be safe, and remember, if something happens to you, especially if someone does something to you, it's never your fault, and you're not alone. But anyway, I heard slight shuffling and the door clicked shut again, and that's when it clicked for me that there was an unknown man in our room, and I had just talked to him. Well, I bolted up into a sitting position and quietly slipped out of bed, grabbing our room key off the coat hook that we put it on, and then I saw legs. I would have screamed if I wasn't so stunned, scared and tired, but I scrambled back into my bed. That's when Rosa woke up. She was incredibly tired, and I was on the verge of panic attack. She was incredibly tired, but I was on the verge of a panic attack. I got up off of my bed so she could see and just pointed at the legs when she saw them, and she went wide-eyed and looked like she was about to join me in my panic attack. We started whispering, trying to figure out what to do next, but then Noelle woke up, asking us to be quiet as she was trying to sleep. So Rosa broke the news that we probably wouldn't be sleeping properly at all that night. Noelle didn't believe us at first, so I tiptoed over to her and showed her the legs, and then it hit both of us that he was completely naked. There was a naked, unconscious for all we knew, man in our room, just in front of our door, blocking our only escape route from this room. And so far, it wasn't looking too great. I went over to Eloise and shook her awake. She scared us half to death with how loud she sounded, but we were terrified that this man had come into our room with bad intentions and was either pretending to be unconscious so that we would go near him, or that he somehow managed to knock himself out, but if we went near him, that he might awaken. I got Eloise to calm down, and Rosa once again explained as I started to break down. The other girls were close behind me, and both in distress. It was at this point that we got our phones, and we started calling every friend and contact that was on the trip with us, desperately hoping that they were awake so that they would come and save us. But sometimes, you just have to be your own hero. We were trying to stay calm and figure out a plan when Noelle was able to reach her dad on the phone. He gave us some advice about how to handle the situation, but ultimately told us to get out and find someone to help us now. Remember, though, that this man was in the entryway and blocking the door with his head, and it honestly felt like we were trapped, but in the end, we decided that we just had to do it. If it went wrong, then we would just hit him on the head with the door, and it was that simple. Noelle went first, followed by Eloise, then me, and then Rosa. The door was only open a crack, so we had to move quickly and quietly, trying to fit through the crack as best as we could. Otherwise, we ran the risk of hitting him and waking him up. I'm fairly certain, too, that Rosa actually hit this guy in the head just to spite him, and I wish that I had the confidence to do that, but I didn't. We went through both of the doors and out into the open space of the foyer area. At the left end of the area was one of the male teachers' rooms. I remember frantically knocking on that door, still being careful not to wake the man or anyone else up, but no teacher ever answered. So we kind of just stood there in the middle of the open area, freaking out, crying ourselves a river. Looking back, I kind of feel stupid, but we can't change the past, right? But then, all of the teachers on the trip came out of a corridor talking quietly. Obviously, seeing us sobbing, seeing me and Noelle collapsed on the floor in a breakdown, was not what they had expected to see that night. And apparently, the man had been walking around most of the rooms, trying the door handles, knocking on the doors, just trying to get in. My male teachers had caught him and taken him downstairs, and at that point, he had a bedrobe on apparently, but the teachers had gone to one of their rooms to figure out what they should do next. Since we were underage and part of a school, they had to call the police. We had to stay up and wait for the police to arrive, and we had to go to a separate area where the female teacher's room was and calm down over there. Can I say, too, that the lady who told us to be quiet because she and her husband wanted to spend some quality time together, and we were just disturbing their peace? Screw you. We were traumatized 12-year-olds. I mean, come on. When the police did eventually arrive, though, they took the man downstairs and we were asked some questions, and we asked questions in return. And the police told us that apparently the man wasn't drunk, he wasn't on drugs either, and he honestly had no reason to be there. They had no idea what his intentions were or what he was doing that night, but he was kicked out of the hotel and was apparently never allowed back there. But I guess that's the creepiest part, because we assumed for so long that he was either drunk or on drugs or something, but no, apparently he wasn't. So, what was he doing, just laying there in that hallway, making it almost impossible for us to escape like that? To this day, I still don't know what that guy was up to, but I have a feeling that it was no good. I lived in a pretty average-sized town my whole life. It was overrun with drugs and one of the worst homelessness problems per capita in the country. Living there, I knew not to trust anyone, but I had enough friends there that I mostly felt safe. But eventually I transferred colleges to one of the biggest, richest cities of the country, and when this happened, I'd been living there for about a year. I felt safe, even alone. My school and home were outside of the regular touristy places, and my neighborhood was mostly retired rich couples or students like myself. I felt safe walking to and from school by myself, so I really wasn't expecting this to happen. So, I normally don't give any strangers the time of day, mostly because I just didn't want to interact with people. But this day, I guess, I was just feeling talkative. I was in my neighborhood, walking back from school, but still had a few streets away from my house when I heard a voice above my music. I pulled out a headphone and stopped, and I heard a man calling out for me. I placed it behind me, but didn't see anything, and figured it must be coming from the car behind me. I don't know what was going through my head this day, and why I didn't just keep heading home, but I walked towards the car, and it was a tan SUV, not screaming danger, but I took a mental note of the first three of his license plate, and when I got to the passenger side window, it was already rolled down, and there was a man sitting in the driver's seat. He was in my general age range, had on nice clothes, a button-up tie, and he was immediately attractive. Not out of place, and not immediately untrustworthy either, but in the end I just thought that he needed directions. He asked if I went to my college, and I said yes. He told me that he sees me by the science building every day and thought that I was pretty. This is where my alarm bell started to ring a bit, because my major was nowhere close to science, and I was only ever on campus twice a week, if that. He asked my name, and I gave him a fake one, but told him that he must have mistaken me for somebody else because I was never by science. He got extremely nervous, and I started to pull away. The alarms in my head were screaming at this point. He told me to wait, though, and asked if I could take him out for a drink right now, even though it was like barely noon. I turned him down, citing the fact that I had a boyfriend. He said, "What, you can't have friends?" in a sort of condescending but forced casual way. Scared now, too, I apologized and said that my boyfriend was waiting for me. It was a lie, but I felt like he needed to know that someone was going to miss me. Now, I've never had such a strong fight or flight instinct hit me before, and I pulled away, walked away as fast as I could. I guess in the heat of the moment, I failed to check if he was following me. But the next time I head to class, I was walking up my street and stopped dead when I recognized the same car again. I feigned realizing that I forgot something, and I walked back into my house, frantically texting my boyfriend. And after that, I just stopped walking to class for a month. A few days after this, I was getting ready to leave for work, and I was working the open shift, so I was leaving my house at like 4 a.m. And even before this, I was very careful about being aware of my surroundings, especially before and after getting into my car. But as I was pulling out, I noticed his car 2 houses down from mine, closer than last time. I texted my boyfriend and let him know, and we agreed that I wasn't going to be leaving the house alone until we figured out what was going on. I work in an industry that casually attracts cops, and the morning shift especially invited at least 5 of them at any time to be hanging out in our lobby. So, I had cultivated a fairly strong and friendly relationship with a few of them. The morning that I had left and noticed him, I sat down with the cops that had gathered for the morning and explained my situation. And they said that while something definitely wasn't right, they couldn't really do anything for me because, well, no threat was made. Not long after my conversation with my cop friends, one of them was responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle, completely by accident, recognized the car as my description of his car, and remembered my story. He told me that he walked up to his car and asked what he was doing, just sitting in his car like that, citing the call that they received, and noticed obvious evidence of surveillance. A camera, a few notebooks, food wrappers, water bottles. They ran his info, and it actually turned out that he had a warrant for assault with a deadly weapon and harassment. I was called in shortly after to identify him and also to make a statement. After he was arrested, I was told that it was obvious that he'd been stalking me for weeks. He'd even documented when my boyfriend came and left and admitted to wanting to kidnap me at some point, having all the equipment to do so in his car, saying that he was just waiting for the right moment, but my boyfriend was just always in the way. I thank those cops every day for saving me from what definitely could have been the worst experience of my life, and my observant neighbors for calling his car. I guess the moral of the story is trust your gut and always be aware of your surroundings. So I went hiking with one of my old friends. He used to be homeless and in a really bad situation with his parents, so I let him stay with me until he got on his feet. Now, one evening, before he actually started staying, he went to get his stuff from the woods that he was posted up that night. It's probably like 11 p.m. or midnight when we met up. I had work and I got off late. We go to the woods to pick up his stuff, and we kind of got lost in the dark. It was abnormally dark that night, considering the full moon was fixing to come around for its phase. Neither of us had flashlights, and my phone had died, so I couldn't use that. It was bad planning, I'll admit. But we stumbled across a bunch of decently large mounds of dirt in this offshoot of the woods. Each mound had a small tree growing from the middle and a crude blank sign at the tops. At this point, it was eerily quiet, considering that on our way over, the woods were insanely loud with cicadas and whatnot. When we hear a branch snap nearby while trying to look at these mounds, and decide to get back to finding his stuff. We eventually found his campsite, and we hurried out. Outside the woods now, we're walking down a one-way street leading to the main road. A large moving truck comes our way and slowly passes us by. We pay it no mind and just nod and keep going. The truck turns around and pulls around into a sort of little offshoot on our right, stopping parallel to us with the engine. The driver gets out and just kind of watches us. We weren't being conspicuous or anything by looking back, just glances over the shoulder here and there. Nothing that you could make out in the darkness from the distance that he was anyhow. We're almost at the top of the street and to my car when he goes to the back of his truck and, I guess, opens the back door. And the next thing that we hear is at least 3 dogs barking their heads off and a flashlight pointed our way. We started running and we had to do some evading through nearby neighborhood streets before we could get back to my car. Eventually we did though, and we just sped the hell out of there. Nothing ever really came of that afterwards too. No cops, no local town chatter, nothing. Well, more did, but that's a different story altogether. And at this point, I'm done with this. So, even though I consider myself a very rational, sort of sciencey person who doesn't believe in the paranormal, some experiences with my daughter have led me to at least be more open about this. And also, it's still something that I'm super fascinated with, even if I struggle to believe it. I also never really talked about the experiences that I'm about to tell you about, since I'm surrounded by people just like me who just kind of brush this stuff off. Anyway, it all started in my last apartment when my daughter was like 4. I'm a single mum, and it's just been the two of us after I separated from her father for some time. So, the first thing happened when we were both playing in her room, and she seemed very focused on our Playmobil game when this conversation happened. She says to me, "Mum, he wants to say hi." And I'm like, "What? Who? The Playmobil figurine?" And she says, "No, Mum, the monster. He's sitting right next to you. Can't you see it?" I, obviously slightly uncomfortable, say, "No, baby, I can't see him. Are you sure that he's there?" "Yeah, you really can't see him? He's waving at you." And then she started waving at something invisible next to me. I just kind of brushed it off as some sort of a fantasy and changed the topic back to our playing. Another time, we were also playing with her Playmobil stuff, which was between me and her, and she was sitting across with her face showing towards me. While we were playing, she annoyingly turned around and looked back and made the go away movement with her hands and said stop. And a few seconds later, she turned around again, did the same movement, and said, "Stop it." I asked her what was wrong, and then she came to me and sat on my lap, and did the same gesture again and said, "Go away." I asked her again what was wrong, since I was really confused, and she was like, "The monster keeps touching me, and I don't like it." Honestly, this is where I started being creeped out as well. So I said, "Leave her alone, monster," and proceeded to play with her and distract her, but this is where I started to feel really uncomfortable in my apartment. The worst one, though, was definitely at night when we decided to sleep in the same bed in my room since it was the weekend. I remember I woke up at probably around 3 in the morning, I think, just after it, I'd guess, and saw her sitting on the bed just staring at the wall. I asked her why she wasn't sleeping, and she said, I can't sleep when the man is standing next to our bed." Now, as I said, I'm a pretty rational person who, for the most part, attributes these things to kids' blooming fantasies, but in that moment, it took both my non-existing balls to tell her that it's okay, and I cuddled up with her until she fell asleep, instead of freaking the hell out and leaving the apartment in the middle of the night. I still kept telling myself that it's just a fantasy and that all kids have this sort of stuff. But what was stranger to me, though, was that all these things stopped happening when we moved. She never talked about a monster or weird man again, never told me that she saw something that I couldn't see. But the really weird coincidence about all of this, though, is that in that apartment is where I had my first and only ever sleep paralysis experience. I was sleeping on my stomach as usual, and I woke up and couldn't move or speak. And suddenly I noticed something stroking my hand and whispering my name into my ear. It was super terrifying in that moment, but I know what sleep paralysis is and why it happens, and that it can cause all kinds of hallucinations, so for me it was 100% this. It never happened again, thankfully, too, but I'm also glad that I'm out of that apartment, since all the weird stuff happened there only. This happened a couple of years ago while I was still in high school, and live feed cameras, those ring door cameras, were first becoming a thing. It must have been about 2014 or 2015 or somewhere around there anyway. So I used to go running in the woods right by my house in upstate Washington. The trail began very steep, almost like a hike, and then became more flat and steady, and that was where I would always begin my runs. I would run every day, roughly around the same time in the morning, around dawn, and also afternoon, before and after school. Now, I was running before school one morning, and a tall man with a beard and a plain tan hat was sitting on the bench at the beginning of the trail. I hated dealing with people because I was an awkward teenager, so I began to look at the ground and just walk by him. As I got closer, I could tell, though, that he was staring at me. I walked past him and I was going to go up the trail. I slightly turned around and saw that he had stood up and was walking the trail behind me. Keep in mind, the sun is barely coming up, so it's mostly still dark. And then I ran. This was not my normal jog too, because I was sprinting at this stage. Nobody was ever on this trail in the morning, and I'd never seen him before, and for some reason it just creeped me out. I knew that I could go through the forest basically to my backyard, so I wasn't that worried, but I was afraid that he was going to attack me or something. As I got further down the trail, I must have lost him, so I slowed down because, frankly, I was out of breath. Then I heard a man's voice say loudly, as if he was screaming, "Well, aren't you going to introduce yourself?" And that was when I lost it. I called my mum and told her that I thought someone was following me on the trail. I told her a brief version of what had happened, and she told me that she could meet me with her car at the head of the trail, just in case the man was following me. She didn't want him to know where we lived. I went down a trail that shortcuts to the head of the trail and was looking out for the man the whole time. I got to my mum's car and started sobbing and crying. I don't really remember why I started sobbing. I just remember being so scared that I was going to be kidnapped. The rest of the day went normally too, and I went to school and went to all my classes, and for the most part just forgot about what had happened. The rest of the week, too, was pretty normal. Until Friday night, on my way home from school, I stopped at the grocery store, and on the way out, I swore that I saw the same man. I thought that I was imagining it, to be honest, so I just kind of walked to my car and we drove home. I didn't want to do much on the weekends, and so I just stayed home and chilled with my family, smoked with friends, and that was about it. I was up late with my friend Josh, just watching bad movie after bad movie, and then we started to hear a knocking on the window at around 3 in the morning. At the time, I had some annoying middle school kids in the neighborhood who were always pulling pranks, so although it was creepy, being the macho kids that we just ignored it and were trying to play it off like we were ignoring the annoying middle schoolers. The knocking then transferred from the back room where we were onto the windows by the front door, though. In the morning, I told my parents, and my dad checked the Ring camera, and as you can probably guess by now, it was the same man. There were a multitude of clips of him. First, a couple of him walking past the camera as if he was walking back and forth in front of the house to see if he could see inside. Then a couple of clips of him kind of stepping back and looking up as if he was trying to look into the upstairs windows from afar. These clips ended around 1:45 in the morning, I think. Then at around 3 or 3:05, he showed up again and was tapping the windows, and we could see him clear as day in the camera. At one point, he stood back and realized the camera was there and just stared into it. He did this a few times and then got really close to the camera and whispered what sounded like, "How was your run?" He smiled and then he just walked away. My dad called the police and had them come out to the house. We showed them the camera footage, but since we did not have cameras in our house or in the back, we couldn't prove that he was actually trespassing, and there's nothing illegal about talking to somebody's doorbell. I never did see him again after that, and when the police checked back the following month, they said that they thought that once he saw the camera, he must have got freaked out and decided that he was caught and decided to drop whatever he was planning to do. It was a really terrifying situation, though. I mean, I was literally being stalked. Also, I'm a guy, so something like this has never really happened to me, and hasn't since then too, so it was just really weird and really freaky. Safe to say, though, that I got a gym membership after all of that, and I haven't gone running down that track since.